The crust of the planet does not simply crack, it ripples like the surface of a pond disturbed by a heavy stone, but the stone is a concentrated surge of thermal energy beyond human comprehension. In the center of the deep Amazonian basin, where a significant portion of the global silo inventory has been concentrated for this hypothetical resonance event, the air itself ceases to be a gas. Under the sudden pressure of several thousand high-yield kinetic discharges occurring within the same millisecond, the atmosphere undergoes a phase transition into a state of high-energy plasma. The nitrogen and oxygen molecules that once provided life are stripped of their electrons, glowing with a violet, ultraviolet, and blinding white radiance that would instantly erase the retinas of any biological entity within a 500-kilometer radius. The heat is not a slow burn, it is a wall of instantaneous molecular agitation. Trees, wildlife, and the very soil are not merely consumed by fire, they are vaporized, their constituent atoms scattered into the expanding fireball. The shockwave travels at hypersonic velocities, a visible shimmering dome of compressed air that moves faster than the speed of sound, liquefying solid granite as it passes. In the first 3 seconds, a crater 10 kilometers deep and 50 kilometers wide is carved into the bedrock, and the surrounding moisture of the rainforest is turned into a pillar of superheated steam that pierces the stratosphere. Further away, in the dense urban corridors of the world, the sky does not turn red, it turns a terrifying, sterile white. In Tokyo, New York, and London, the horizon glows with the intensity of 1,000 suns. Even before the physical shockwave arrives, the thermal pulse travels at the speed of light. Skyscrapers do not just catch fire, their steel skeletons reach their melting points in less than a second. Glass windows do not shatter outward, they melt and run down the sides of buildings like tears before the pressure wave hits and turns the liquid silica into a spray of microscopic needles. The sheer force of the expanding gases creates a vacuum behind the initial front, pulling the debris back toward the center of the discharge, creating a chaotic, churning vortex of pulverized concrete and vaporized metal. This is the end. But to understand why, we must rewind to the beginning. Before the first spark of this planetary resonance event, the Earth exists in a delicate state of geodynamic and atmospheric equilibrium. We live upon a sphere roughly 12,742 kilometers in diameter, wrapped in a thin, protective veil of gases we call the atmosphere. This atmosphere is held in place by the gravitational pull of the planet, which exerts a constant force, keeping the pressure at sea level at approximately 1 bar. This pressure is essential for the stability of liquid water and the structural integrity of biological cells. The Earth's core, a rotating mass of molten iron and nickel, generates a magnetosphere that shields us from the relentless bombardment of solar radiation. We take for granted the stability of the crust, which averages only 30 to 50 kilometers in thickness under the continents. Beneath this thin shell lies the mantle, a semi-solid layer of silicate rock that flows over millions of years. The energy contained within the global inventory of high-yield kinetic devices represents a concentrated release of the very forces that power the stars, nuclear fusion and fission. When we speak of the total global arsenal, we are discussing approximately 12,500 warheads. To understand the physics of the disaster, one must understand the energy density involved. Each individual device is designed to trigger a sequence where a primary fission reaction compresses a secondary fusion fuel, usually isotopes of hydrogen. This process mimics the core of the Sun, reaching temperatures of 100 million degrees Celsius. When 12,000 of these triggers are activated simultaneously, we are not just creating a large fire, we are introducing a stellar-level energy event directly onto the surface of a fragile silicate planet. The first law of thermodynamics states that energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. In this scenario, the chemical and nuclear potential energy stored within these devices is transformed into thermal energy, kinetic energy, and ionizing radiation. The sudden release of this energy would involve the discharge of approximately 7,000 megatons of TNT equivalent. While this is small compared to the total kinetic energy of the Earth's rotation, its concentration in the atmosphere and on the thin crust creates a localized disruption that the planet's systems cannot absorb. As the countdown reaches 0, the simultaneous activation of every trigger sends a signal through the global command and control infrastructure. In the silos buried deep beneath the plains of the Midwestern United States, inside the mobile launchers traversing the vast Siberian taiga, and within the silent hulls of submarines prowling the depths of the Arctic Ocean, the physics of erasure begins. The conventional high explosives surrounding the radioactive cores detonate with microsecond precision. This inward-facing explosion, or implosion, squeezes the plutonium pits until they reach a state of supercriticality. In a fraction of a microsecond, the strong nuclear force is overcome. Atoms are ripped apart, releasing a flood of neutrons and gamma radiation. This radiation is so intense that it heats the surrounding casing of the device to millions of degrees before the device itself has time to physically expand. This is the X-ray transition, where the energy moves faster than the physical matter can react. The air surrounding the discharge points is instantly turned into a brilliant, expanding sphere of plasma. In the first millisecond of the global discharge, the atmosphere undergoes a process of total ionization. The sky over every major military installation and urban center is replaced by a glow so bright that it would be visible from the orbit of Mars. This is not the light of combustion, but the light of the vacuum being filled with raw, unshielded energy. The thermal pulse radiates outward at the speed of light, reaching the horizon in a heartbeat. In rural areas, dry grass and forests spontaneously ignite. In cities, the asphalt on the roads begins to bubble and smoke. Paint on the sides of cars curls and peels away in a single instant, followed closely by the melting of plastic components. The physics of the human eye cannot process this level of luminosity. Anyone looking toward a discharge point would experience the total erasure of their visual cortex before the brain could register a single image. The silence is the most terrifying part of this initial phase. Because the thermal pulse and radiation travel at the speed of light, they arrive long before the sound of the explosion. For a few seconds, the world is a silent, glowing furnace. Then comes the pressure. The air that was heated to millions of degrees expands with a force that defies description. This is the blast wave, a wall of air so compressed that it behaves like a solid object. When this wave hits a forest, it does not just knock over trees, it strips the bark, branches, and leaves off instantly, leaving behind nothing but splintered, white-hot poles of wood. When it hits a mountain range, the pressure causes massive landslides as the very shock vibrates through the tectonic plates. As the blast wave moves across the oceans, it creates a unique phenomenon. The surface of the water is instantly vaporized, creating a layer of high-pressure steam that acts as a lubricant for the wind. The wave pushes the water downward and outward, creating a series of tsunamis that are not caused by undersea earthquakes, but by the sheer weight of the atmosphere pressing down on the sea. These waves, hundreds of meters high, begin their journey toward the coastlines, carrying with them the thermal energy of the explosions. 10 minutes into the event, the individual mushroom clouds begin to merge. Each cloud has risen 40 kilometers into the air, punching through the troposphere and entering the stratosphere. The soot and debris from the vaporized cities and forests are carried upward by the intense convection currents. This is not the gray smoke of a campfire, it is a dense, black, oily carbon soot created by the incomplete combustion of plastics, chemicals, and petroleum products. The stratosphere is a stable layer of the atmosphere. Unlike the troposphere, where weather occurs and rain washes the air clean, the stratosphere is dry and stagnant. Once the black soot reaches this height, it will not fall back down. It begins to spread laterally, fanning out until it covers the entire northern hemisphere in a shroud of darkness. The sun, which had been a source of life for billions of years, is blocked out. Its light is reflected back into space by the uppermost layers of the smoke, while the lower layers absorb the heat, causing the stratosphere to warm significantly while the surface of the Earth below plunges into an artificial twilight. Most turn away from the void. But here at Velastrix, we decode the math behind the chaos. Join the archive by subscribing now. As the hours pass, the global temperature begins to plummet. This is the onset of the long-term climatic shift known as the darkening. In the first week, the average temperature over the continents drops by 15 to 20 degrees Celsius. In areas that were once temperate, the ground freezes solid. The hydrological cycle is broken. Because the sun's energy can no longer reach the surface, the process of evaporation from the oceans slows down significantly. The rains stop, but the air remains humid with the lingering moisture of the initial vaporizations, creating a thick, toxic fog that smells of ozone and sulfur. The biological cessation is widespread. Most plant life, deprived of the sunlight needed for photosynthesis, enters a state of dormancy or simply fails. The food chains of the world collapse in a matter of days. In the oceans, the phytoplankton, the foundation of the marine food web, begin to vanish as the upper layers of the water cool and the light fades. The lack of oxygen production from both terrestrial and marine plants begins to subtly alter the composition of the air, though the immediate threat remains the falling temperatures and the radioactive fallout. The fallout is a silent, invisible rain. The heavier particles of debris, coated in the radioactive isotopes created during the fission process, begin to settle back to Earth. This is not a uniform coating, it is concentrated by the prevailing winds into hot zones that stretch for thousands of kilometers downwind of the initial discharge sites. The isotopes, such as cesium-137 and strontium-90, emit high-energy particles that penetrate deep into the cellular structure of any surviving organisms. This disrupts the DNA, preventing cells from replicating and leading to a slow, inevitable fade of all complex life forms. The sky, once a brilliant blue, is now a permanent, bruised shade of deep purple and charcoal. The stars are no longer visible. The moon is a faint, ghostly memory behind the thick veil of the stratosphere. The cities, once the beacons of human achievement, are silent monuments of twisted steel and pulverized stone. There is no sound but the howling of the wind, which has become a constant, biting gale as the temperature gradients between the cooling land masses and the relatively warmer oceans create massive atmospheric instabilities. The scale of the erasure is so absolute that it reaches into the geological record. Future civilizations, should they ever arise on a distant planet and visit the remains of Earth, would find a strange layer in the sedimentary rock. It would be a thin, dark line rich in carbon, radioactive isotopes, and microscopic fragments of artificial polymers, the Vell-astrix layer of human history. This layer would mark the exact moment when a technological species chose to release the energy of the stars upon its own cradle. Over the next several decades, the darkness slowly begins to lift. The soot in the stratosphere eventually falls away, but the world it reveals is unrecognizable. The glaciers have advanced from the poles, covering much of the northern continents in sheets of ice several hundred meters thick. The oceans have receded as water is locked away in these new ice caps. The atmosphere is thinner, scarred by the chemical reactions that destroyed the ozone layer during the initial high heat phase. Without the ozone layer, the surface is now bathed in intense ultraviolet radiation from the sun, making it difficult for any surviving life to inhabit the land. The Earth remains, a silent, scarred sphere spinning in the void. It has endured 5 major extinction events in its 4,500 million year history, and it will endure this one as well. But the era of the architects is over. The complex systems of trade, art, science, and memory have been reduced to their basic elements. The iron of the skyscrapers will eventually rust and return to the Earth, the plastic will break down into microparticles, the radioactive isotopes will eventually decay into stable elements over thousands of years. The silence that follows is not the silence of peace, but the silence of a void where there was once a symphony. The math of the disaster is cold and indifferent. It does not care about the beauty of the civilizations it erased or the potential of the minds it silenced. It only follows the laws of physics, the laws of energy, pressure, and thermodynamics. In the final accounting, the detonation of the global inventory is a reminder of our place in the cosmos. We are a species that learned to tap into the fundamental forces of the universe, but we failed to master the wisdom required to handle them. We are a brief flicker of consciousness in a vast, dark expanse, and this scenario is the ultimate cautionary tale of what happens when the light of reason is extinguished by the light of 1,000 suns. To explore the impossible and visualize the unknown, subscribe to Velastrix.